Welcome back to our panel discussion, Navigating Cloud Choices in the Government, sponsored by QTS here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Bill Zielinski, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for IT Category Management at the General Services Administration, Todd Simpson is the CIO at the FDA, and Dave McComber, Executive Vice President of Public Sector and Federal Sales at QTS. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And let's begin a little bit in this second segment with talking about how to buy cloud, because nothing happens till somebody buys something, as the old saying goes, especially for salespeople, understand that. But as FDA goes in deeper and deeper in using your brokerage model and your governance oversight model, what are some of your strategies for acquiring cloud services from specific companies?
So I think the key is collaboration. It's collaboration with those companies and collaborating on the inside with the procurement people. And there's a big piece to the security aspect. The authorization to operate is probably more meaningful to me than the procurement piece, because the procurement piece really hasn't been the sticking point for me to move the ball down the field. If it makes sense, generally, we're able to find the funding and we're able to execute, but it has to make sense. And it seems that we've had more issues with licensing than anything in the cloud, and that seems to be.
What brings that about?
It's predicting the license load. It's sometimes you go in thinking it's one deal and it's another deal at the end of it. I didn't want to say bait and switch, but there is. You have to be very. You have to watch the wording of the contracts very, very carefully. You have to make sure that the contracts have the leverage that you need to be able to exit, should you choose to do that, or to maneuver, basically, without having to go back and revisit the procurement process later. That's the key. And it's, in the beginning, I think it was a little more difficult to get it right because we were unfamiliar. But, you know, as I said, we have 6 cloud service providers. We have over 20 applications in the cloud. We're actually developing applications in the cloud now. So we're beyond foundational. We're at probably a 2 on the maturing level now. So procurement, I think that we've developed the partnerships, we found the pathways, we have the brokerage service, and we have the criteria in place to evaluate the cloud procurements. And once it makes sense, we tend to have a team approach behind it to make it happen.
So it sounds like maybe the issue of virtualization can multiply instances and therefore license requirements and costs, and you just want to get that established right away before you get deeper in to the process.
Yeah, and these are very expensive endeavors too. And as much as everybody wants to have the solution, sometimes it's difficult to find out who actually owns the solution, who the funding party is going to be, and so this is it's a very complex kind of.
Yeah, Heart Monitors doesn't want to pay for baby food, right?
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
So when you're doing your work and deciding on which cloud of the 6, right? I mean, a lot of the vendors out there, there's a lot of organizations that do infrastructure as a service. Do you typically do a bake-off, or how do you decide if you're going to put it on platform A, platform B, or platform C from an IaaS perspective?
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because I actually only have one infrastructure as a service provider.
Got it.
And they're broken into 2 subsidiaries, but they are under the same shell. So I have 2, but it's really one infrastructure as a service provider, and I have 3 platform as a service providers, and I have 1 software as a service provider. And so when I was talking about the microservices before, we really get into the platform as a service and the software as a service. Really, that's the key. So I tried to get more diversity on that end of the business. The infrastructure as a service, it's important, but I treat that more as warehousing, so.
So, and Dave, to that question about the different models that are there, we've seen a few different ones where folks have in essence created mini competitions. So if they have multiple infrastructures or service providers that are out there, they will drop a job, if you will, and say, hey, what are you willing to do for this? And so they're creating mini competitions to see if they can get best pricing. You see some models where folks are simply using this as a balancing, kind of balancing their risk across multiple providers, taking a look at what are their key operations and ensuring that they have risk kind of spread out across. So there's a lot of different models that people employ to make those decisions decisions when and where they have multiple cloud service providers.
So when you do have an agency that wants to conduct a mini competition or bake-off among competing suppliers, to me that implies the importance of getting your service level agreement spelled out really carefully so that you have both sides bidding on the same thing.
Absolutely, and kind of following back up on something that Todd said when he said, kind of, you really got to know and understand what you have in your terms and conditions and what's there. The one piece I was going to add to that is line of sight to the information that you need to manage it, right? So that idea of you know what you're trying to manage too, but if you can't get that information that you need to manage, so having those service level agreements that provide you with the kind of information you need to know, you have to make sure that you get that baked in on the front end, lest you find yourself with a commitment for some period of time, yet you really can't effectively manage it.
So one of the things that we're seeing in our space is when we're talking to an agency about potentially bringing in some of their workloads, it used to be, what kind of connectivity do you have to your data center, right? So how many connectivity providers do you have, what kinds of bandwidth, that sort of thing. Now they're all asking us was, how quickly can you get me to the big cloud providers, right? Do you have direct connect into your data center so that I don't have the latency, that I don't have to pay the bandwidth charges? And that's a big strategy that I think a lot of the companies in my space are looking at is how do I get direct connect to the two that you need, and how do I get direct connect to the ones that you need in my data center so that it's there when you come in? Because it is going to, in a lot of cases, it is going to be hybrid, right? You're going to have some stuff that just isn't going to move, but you want to be able to either over time port it up there, or be able to very quickly be able to have your environment have easy access to those big cloud providers.
So that is, from the end user perspective, they're not aware of where things are executing because the pipes are adequate to make it seem as if they're all local.
Right, but the pipes now are the big cloud providers, not the big
Not the carriers.
not the carriers, exactly.
Got it.
Right, so it's a big shift that we're starting to see in terms of the requirements.
And Bill, FedRAMP is famous in GSA for approving suppliers on a certain level of cybersecurity. But it's probably a good point to talk about what else it is in terms of helping agencies acquire cloud services.
So absolutely. One of the things that we have with GSA, of course, is FedRAMP, where we're providing that certification of the capabilities of those providers to be able to protect and secure the services that they're providing. I think one of the challenges that as we make this move to cloud is that it really does fundamentally change that delivery model to where those traditional boundaries that have been drawn in an ATO don't quite look the same. So today's ATO tends to look for, I need to be able to draw my line and my boundary around stuff that I could see, feel, and touch. Part of what FedRAMP is really looking to do is to be able to assist and help with that idea that you don't have those solid lines in the way that you have before. And so you still have to get to that point where you're providing that security, that assurance of the security that's there, giving that assurity to an agency CIO that they can operate in that environment, and allowing them to move to that point of signing off on the ATO much more quickly. So as the FedRAMP program is maturing, they're maturing along with the changes in these kind of delivery models that are out there. But again, it is challenging, because if you take those overlays that exist today, you get to some point of saying, well, that doesn't kind of apply in a cloud environment, but how do we move towards that signature without that applying? And I do think that one of the big things that we in government need to do is really evolve that ATO process to match the delivery models that are now out there.
Which is what Todd said was key for him, is the ATO more so than the acquisition process.
Yes. So and you hit the nail right on the head with that, because it's that ATO process that there is an acceptable amount of risk that you can accept when you're signing an ATO. And so as long as I think you have the plan to remedy those risks, to mitigate those risks in place, you can actually move forward with some of these cloud endeavors. And for a long time, it was these risks that kind of stifled activity, I think, across the whole federal government. I saw it in 2 agencies before coming to the FDA, and by the time I got to the FDA, the FDA populace had enough of that. They wanted the cloud, they needed the cloud to do the work that they do. And yeah, you really got to the point there.
We were just at a dinner with one of the speakers from the IC community, and they were talking about an ATO process that's in a matter of days versus weeks and sometimes months that it's taking now. So almost a fast pathing of the ATO process internally within the agency, which was pretty exciting to hear.
Yeah, Dave, I wanted to ask you too, on that point, you're in sales,
Yeah.
of course, so the customer is always right, but we all know that there are some customers that are way better to deal with than others.
Some are more right than others.
Right, correct. And so from a federal perspective, what should agencies be doing to make sure that when they're negotiating with cloud people that they, as the agencies, are getting the most out of that relationship?
Yeah, I think it comes down to four things. Capabilities of the cloud service provider or the hosting company, I think, is really important. Number two, what we're starting to see is a lot of new entries into the space that don't have federal past performance. And there's a lot of people that are looking at the federal market and licking their chops, but I think that FedRAMP does a good job in kind of weeding out some of those folks, because to go through the FedRAMP process, it's not a cheap endeavor, right? And to get that stamp. So when I talked to Matt a couple weeks ago, they have on their website some price ranges to get the FedRAMP stamp, and it's pretty expensive. And that's in part to make sure that these people are serious about staying in the federal game and not jumping in and jumping out, because once you get in, I mean, you don't want an agency to get all excited and on your application, then to have them then go off. So I think it's capabilities, it's federal past performance. I think the next thing is security and compliance. I mean, those are huge things. You, as a cloud service provider and a data center organization, do you have people on staff that can help the agency with their ATOs when they get their audits? Are you going to be there shoulder to shoulder to give them all of the information very easily so that ATO process and the renewal goes fairly easily is extremely important. And then the last thing, do you provide customer service? Because I think that there's a lot of organizations that can help. There's a systems integrator community, there's resellers and that sort of thing. But what we're seeing is that people are moving data centers from either government or other commercial providers to certain locations based on the customer service. It shouldn't take me 3 weeks to get a cross connect. It shouldn't take a service technician 4 hours to get through security. And those are really important things. How do you treat the agency when they're in your walls, and do you help them make their lives easier? So those are the kind of the four things I would say.
So Todd, yeah, what are most important to you in crafting SLAs? That pretty much mirror what.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But the service level agreements are definitely the acceptable use of the service. The expectations have to be in there. I have to understand the relationship that I'm going to have, and I have to, being completely candid, everything that you just said, those four characteristics, if the cloud service providers come to me and they are strong in those areas, they're probably going to have a pretty good chance of doing business with us. And the first step in doing business is, of course, getting them on that technology roadmap. And making sure that they fit in, because not every cloud service provider that's offering software as a service actually fits in our technology roadmap. There are lots of different flavors out there, and when you're trying to standardize an environment, you can actually use a mechanism like the cloud to do rapid standardization. When you put those lines of service in, if you've got one flavor that you're going to develop in, and you're looking at 15 end-of-life applications, well, what are you going to do? You're going to redevelop them in that standard, and you kill two birds with one stone. You
So
get the
it sounds
cloud.
like you do a pretty in-depth analysis of the specific technologies in a provider's centers.
We have to, and we're on the precipice of this digital transformation, and we've done a ton of work to build trust in the FDA community that we can be good stewards of their business. We automated the inspection process, and we've got over 20,000 automated inspections to date through our new automated inspection process. We're automating our auditing process. We've automated the electronic exchange between Customs Border Patrol and the FDA. These things build the trust that I think is needed to take that next step. So.
Interesting. Dave, comment? I mean, do
Well,
customers,
it's interesting.
do you let them in to
Yeah,
take a look at what
mean,
you got under the hood there?
The interagency dependencies is pretty important, right? And I think that as agencies make some of these big moves, like whether they have to, based on an OMB mandate or something like that, close a data center, the the connections to your organization and others are pretty important to understand, right? And I think that as you start to look at it, it's not merely just lifting and shifting from one place to the other, because you're going to break a lot of stuff on the way, right? And you may break a lot of stuff within that agency, but then the interagency dependencies is pretty important to understand as well. And so when you look at some of the horizons and timelines so if agency XYZ has to be out by 2020, it's 2017, you better have a pretty good idea of where you're going and what you're doing, because that calendar is going to be chewed up pretty quickly with all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Bill, I guess that gives rise to the question, is the technology pathway or roadmap of the cloud providers and that community, that must matter to any agency that's thinking of moving with particular provider.
Oh, absolutely. And so one of the things that we do at GSA and what we offer to agencies, and I'll tell you, just being here on the panel with Todd, he's the kind of person that I won't hesitate in the near future to say, hey, I was contacted by an agency, would you give us 30 minutes because they're experiencing something similar. So we have that experience of knowing well what's going on across the federal space. We certainly are interacting with the providers of these services and keeping track of where they are in kind of their technology roadmaps, because it's vitally important to the customers that we serve. So one of the things that we can do is offer that assistance, and a lot of the kind of the market research and deep back-end research, we could provide a head start for any agency who's earlier in that path than, say, Todd and folks are there at FDA.
A good place to break here. My guests today are Bill Zielinski, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for IT Category Management at the General Services Administration. Todd Simpson is the Chief Information Officer at the Food and Drug Administration. Dave McComber, Executive Vice President of Public Sector and Federal at QTS. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This panel discussion is Navigating Cloud Choices in Government, sponsored by QTS, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.